Okay, I've just had on to Richmond II for a couple of days now, and I've spent the time sorting it and cutting and clipping the counters, that kind of thing. And I thought I'd do a video on my experience with it. I wasn't sure whether to post it or not, but at least one commentator on Consim thought it might be a good idea to do so. I'll just to show you my experience with the maps is, and let's just see where this goes. Now, I had owned the original On to Richmond, and it was one of my favorite titles in the series, although admittedly I didn't play it that much because I thought the maps were just too dark, and I was very excited when this edition came out with the new Charlie Kibler maps. They're absolutely beautiful. But let's first start with the sorting. I'll show you my experience with Roads to Gettysburg 2. Now, I was able to get all of the counters into 2 trays with a pretty efficient sort by doing the Gettysburg campaign and the Maryland campaign, putting them in their own trays, and of course all the miscellaneous markers. The only thing I was not able to get into the trays was the Long Roads to Gettysburg option, which I just kept unpunched. So that turned out to be fairly successful. When you play these games with 3 campaigns in one box, you've got to have an efficient sortation, or it's going to take you hours to set up a scenario. So what was my solution? Now, MMP has made it a bit easier on us. As you can see, the On to Richmond box is larger, taller than the Roads to Gettysburg, and you're going to need every inch of space to sort these things. I've also found that the best way to store these games is to lie them flat, not put them like on a bookshelf. That can cause some of the counters to fall out of the trays. Let's see how I did the sortation. Of course, yours may be different. You might try something different. This is the way I found it to be fairly efficient. Now I'll let the camera hang on to this image for a while, and I can explain what I did. My methodology is often to take the scenario, which has the most counters, or the largest scenario, or your favorite scenario, and give it its own sortation. This way I don't have to go through hundreds of counters to try and pick out the order of battle. Because as many of you know, setting up these scenarios is not an easy thing from the booklets. You often have these long lists of troops that you have to look up, and finding them in the myriad trays is not easy. So what I did was I took my favorite scenario, which happens to be the Gates of Richmond, and I divided them into 3. So I've got a Gates of Richmond scenario here for the Union, all fit in one tray, all the Confederates fit in another. Then I took all the odd Union Corps, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 9th, and put them in one tray, and Confederate regiments in another, Confederate brigades in another, and Union brigades in another. This way you can find the counters a lot faster. Common sense for the other stuff, track info, control markers, flanks, supply, wagons, subunits, and so on. Information, DMZ and amphibious, plus boats. You can do a little fine sortation any way you like, but you can get them all into one tray, which is nice. I did the same thing for the Wilderness Campaign. That would be my favorite scenario, would be Grant crossing the Rapidan, so I took the Union in one tray, Confederates another. And for Confederates in 64, I took the 3rd Corps, West Virginia, and SCV, Southeast Virginia. Confederates, 1st, 2nd, Richmond Garrison, and Cavalry. Any way you can get these counters in and you can find them fast is always going to be a benefit. For the strength markers and stuff, well, that's just common sense. I just put the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s and 5s, 6s and 7s, 8s and 9s, 10s and 11, 12s and 13, 14 and 15, 16 and 17, and 18 to 21. Abattis counters, forts, 62, 64, breastworks, and so on. Turn delay, artillery, and fatigues. And that way I was able to get every single counter into 2 trays and still have room left in the box for the maps. Now I don't want this to turn into just an unboxing video because people who have the game already know what's in it. But for you new people who don't have it, you do get the version 1.5 rules. You get a complete Peninsular Campaign booklet, Petersburg Campaign, and Grant Takes Command, which is the Overland Campaign. So you get 3 distinct campaigns in here. And the manuals are thick with lots of scenarios. You've got a mine of scenarios with this game set. Okay, there's been lots of discussion about the maps and how they're not cut properly or actually have the edges on them, stuff like that. But you don't have to get bent out of shape with that. I mean, you just take a good Olfa cutter and cut the edges off and you're fine. Now I understand the company is going to be re-releasing the maps, I guess, with the borders off. I don't think it's a big deal. I mean, any map you buy always has a border on it. Nothing new about that. I've been assembling maps since the 70s with like La Bataille de Moscova and Terrible Swift Swords, so I don't know what the big deal is about it. But I will show you each of the maps. You do get 4 maps in the game, and of course you get the little wee sort of campaign insert here. There's no real instructions on how the maps go together except for this diagram. But I'll show you the maps individually, and I'll show you what I did to trim the edge. Now what you see before you is the On to Richmond North map, which is shown here. The maps are so big I can't show it to you all in one frame. I have a standard IKEA table, which I can put the fly leaf on and make it longer, and I'll show you how that works in a second. But that's the first map, and it's hard to keep it in focus here. This is a bit of a close-up of the North map. It happens to be my favorite map because it's the scenario that I explore the most, which is the 7 days battles. And you've got the entrenchments around Richmond shown. You've got the Chickahominy, and of course you've got 7 Pines here, where the battle was fought on May 31st in Fair Oak Station. So for the 7 days battle, the climax often comes right here, just outside the city. It's amazing to think that McClellan got to within 4 or 5 miles of the city. It was an amazing feat for 1862, and it should have been the campaign that probably decided the war in the East. But, as one person at least pointed out, McClellan probably lost his nerve, and Robert E. Lee turned the Union campaign into shambles. Now, as much as I love the Great Campaign series, there are certain titles that don't show off the system to its best advantage. And On to Richmond, the 7 days campaign, is one of the titles that is not the best for showing off the system. That's because when you get right down to it, the bulk of the campaign is decided in the immediate vicinity of Richmond, and the game is not strong on battle and maneuver in battle formation. It's much better when you have wide open spaces and campaign forces are moving. A good one is Stonewall in the Valley. That's another good one because you've got wide open spaces and small forces. Another title that I never really warmed up to was Chattanooga, for the same reason as Richmond. With the Battle Above the Clouds, you've got the action taking place immediately around the city of Chattanooga and Missionary Ridge, and you don't have these large spaces to maneuver. But that's neither here nor there. That's just the system. That's the way it is. Wonderful rendering of terrain with 1 mile equaling 1 hex. So it's always interesting when you get 7 movement points, and you can just imagine, well, that corps is moving 7 miles that day. It's a wonderful system. Let's look at some of the other maps. Okay, this is the essence of the Grant Takes Command map. I can't show you all of it. I can't zoom out that far. I can go a little to the left to show you how much space it takes in my IKEA table. it comfortably fits on the table when you're doing a one mapper. And for a good many of the scenarios, this one map is great. Especially for my favorite scenario, Grant crosses the Rapidan. You've got Fredericksburg here, Chancellorsville, of course, Rappahannock, and there's the Rapidan arcing up this way, and way up here is Culpeper, and there's Rapidan Station. Now you could use this map, and I will do so, to play Stonewall's Last Battle. Stonewall's Last Battle is a game I had at one time, but the maps I thought were very dark. And on this one map, you can play all of the opening moves of the Wilderness Campaign. Beautifully done Charlie Kibler artwork. Okay, here's a view of the Grant Takes Command North map, the one we just looked at, which I'll call widescreen view, and where I just pointed out Spotsylvania and Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville and so on. That's the Grant Takes Command North. This is the south part of the map, which is actually the area west of Richmond. Now this is what the discussion on the Consim board about the border is. You'll notice that the gray border is still there on this map, and the gray border is still present on that map. Now I have not cut this one yet, but on my other maps I have cut it. I can show you what that's like. It's no big deal. You just take an X-Acto knife and cut it. And that's to the immediate west of Richmond. This is the railroad there. Richmond is just off the map to the right. And I'll show you that map in a moment. This one kind of confused me because I was not used to seeing this far west of Richmond. I had not really seen it in any other game before. Now what surprised me about this map was I was expecting to see Appomattox Courthouse. I looked in vain for Appomattox Courthouse. This is the Appomattox River there. That's the James. That's actually Richmond there. Get that in the frame. Right here. That's Richmond itself. So we have another map that extends over that way, the one I showed you first. But Appomattox is actually off of the west edge of the board. The board does not cover where Lee surrendered to Grant. It's because the campaign was pretty well decided before then. Okay, this is where it can get a bit confusing because the little mini map that they give you here is not really labeled quite the way I would understand it. This here is the On to Richmond South map, but it's not labeled in this diagram. Here you see the On to Richmond South map attached to the On to Richmond North map. Gets confusing because on the diagram here they show the On to Richmond North map, they don't show the On to Richmond South map, which of course that is. Now let's move the camera here a little bit, and you can see you've got Petersburg here and Richmond there, and of course the James. Now here's where I did cut the map, because here at this border, that's where the gray would show. So I trimmed the gray border off of the south map, and I'm heavily inclined to trim the border on the north map. Let's zoom in so I can show you what I'm talking about. Here you can see where the On to Richmond South map is a bit offset from the north one, and you want to be carefully trimmed there. So the clue, the common hex, is this Wilton Farm. You've got Ball's Bluff here, Chaffin's Bluff. You can align them up, no problem. When you play it, there's no problem. I had no trouble aligning them up. But you will have to trim them unless you want that crazy gray line there. Now I haven't yet set up, I guess, what will be the Grant Takes Command South map up here. I don't know what scenario you would use that you would need all that room, unless you're playing maybe the whole Overland campaign. I have not looked carefully at each of the scenarios. All I know is that I play scenarios, not the grand campaign. I don't really have the space for it all either, nor the time, nor even the inclination. I'm quite happy with the scenarios. The maps are so well done and allows me to explore what I want to explore in Civil War history. Okay, here's another odd configuration. I've taken the On to Richmond North map, which shows you the city of Richmond down there here, and then the Grant takes command South map. So what you're really looking at then is Richmond over here, the James River going west, and Petersburg's off the map here to the south, and the area, I guess, where Lee retreats to from the Petersburg map. Now, to answer a lot of your questions, people are saying, well, will this fit in my table? Well, there's no way all 4 maps will fit on my table. I can't set up the whole 4 mapper on my table. It's because the IKEA map is long and skinny. So that's why I usually play scenarios. That will also mean if I did play a scenario that takes this orientation, I don't think there is one that does, but I would have to trim, again, the edges here if I wanted the overlap to be good. I'll zoom in on that in a second. Okay, so you can see here where some trimming would be necessary if you wanted your map to be perfect. You'd have to trim off the gray here and possibly the gray here. No big deal, it can be done. But it's kind of academic for me since I will tend to play scenarios which most of the time take place on one map anyway, so I don't need to attach all of this together. I suppose at a convention it would be fun to set all 4 maps up and play maybe the whole shebang, but I haven't studied the scenarios enough to know if there is a campaign that covers Grant crossing the Rapidan all the way to Petersburg and Appomattox. There very well could be, but I just haven't studied that yet. I thought I'd just do this short video to show you my sortation procedures and how I overcame the map problem. So that's it for On to Richmond II. I think for those of you who bought it, you won't be sorry. It's a very nicely done package. Thank you for watching.